Uh, hold on. Okay. But I was just reflecting, and I almost have a hard time imagining my life, a year ago, because I mean, it's almost unrecognizable, but in the best way. And so that is obviously a testament to this work and so many things that has opened up. But yeah, when you talk of what's possible in the future, it feels wide open. And also, if this much change has come from the last year, like, right, what could happen in the next year? So yeah, I
Can you
know.
share a little bit where you were when you were looking at engaging with this work?
Yeah. So I think that where I was is that I was, in a way, perfect. I had followed all of the scripts that I thought that I was supposed to follow. And, I was really lucky because I had really supportive parents, and I didn't ever feel funneled into a certain job or a certain path. And yet somehow I absorbed all of these messages of what it meant to be a perfect woman in this world. And I followed them to a T, and yet I got there, and there's just this nagging feeling of something missing, right? I had done all of the things, and yet it felt so tremendously hard. It was like I was sprinting every day, and yet being held back by, I don't know, I imagined myself like shackled in all of these weights. I wasn't where I imagined that I would be if by following all those scripts so perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, such a familiar story that is very familiar to me intimately, and that's something that we hear from our thrivers that calls them on this journey. What helped you, or why did you make a decision to join us on this journey of healing PSD?
I don't know. It's hard to articulate. Maybe it was one of the first times in my adult life that I decided to just lead with my intuition rather than lead with this objective script of what I should. Essentially, I led with intuition versus leading with shoulds. The prior 4 decades of my life, well, more or less, was following the shoulds. And finally I said, it felt like a leap. And yet in a very deep, profound way, it felt like the next thing that I had to do. I knew I had to go and do the work with you and Jeffrey next. And, couldn't be more happy that I did, but I don't know if I could give you 3 objective reasons why. I mean, obviously you have the credentials in the background, and I had read your book, but it was something much more, it was something that came from a deeper place of knowing, like, I need to do this.
Yeah. And that I love that following intuition. It is such a huge reclamation right out of the gate. And that is so essential for everything that we do in this journey. It's all about reclaiming what you know. And
Yeah.
that goes much deeper than any quote unquote logical or rational reasons or the pros and cons or the shoots, that deep knowing. And I've seen you unfold into living in alignment with your deep knowing step after step. And that's just been so amazing to witness. Would you
Yeah.
share what has unfolded for you? What has shifted over the course of this work, this journey? You mentioned that it's unrecognizable, right? Your life from a year ago to your life now. What exactly has changed?
Everything. Everything and nothing, right? I think, well, if I think about using an analogy to begin with, it was sort of like I had a closet full of ready to wear clothing before, tons of them, and yet none of them felt exactly right. And now it's as if I have 3 custom cut pieces of clothing that you step into and you feel alive because it's beautiful fabric and it's made just for you. There's no squishing certain parts of you into something that almost fits. So there's just so much ease. Obviously, that's a general notion, but in specific, where do I begin? I was, before doing work that was absolutely within my zone of excellence, I had always the best reviews and I tracked properly with where I should have been tracking. I practiced law for a long time with wonderful people in a very, very well-respected firm. And the work was even intellectually interesting. And yet it didn't speak to me on a deeper, profound, almost soul level in any sense. And that was work that I had been doing for roughly 15 years. And I was, I had found myself in this pattern of leaving it because I had this knowing that even though the pay was great and it was what I, quote, should be doing, it didn't feel right necessarily. It didn't feel aligned. And so I would leave it. And then, I would be asked to come back and I would come back. And so it was this sort of like push, pull. And, over the course of the last year, I feel like I have, graciously and elegantly stepped out of that work and into something that is really aligned with me. It allows me to spend all of the time that I want with my kids. It's intellectually interesting and fun. And, and there's as much money as I want, which is something that feels sort of dangerous in the world of the patriarchy, right? And something that we've talked about a lot. But that's one place. I was living in a place that, again, checked all of the boxes of the sort of place that I should be living in, that was great to raise kids in. And yet, for whatever reason, it didn't really feel aligned on a deeper level for me. I keep using the word deeper, but that's sort of what this is all about, is the push-pull between the shoulds and then that deeper voice that you keep hearing. And, I've been able to actually physically move into a place right now. I'm living in Mexico, and I have been, that really makes me feel alive every single day. And I really appreciate and enjoy living here every day. And my kids love it. And again, like, that's yet another fairly sizable weight that has been shifted and lifted away in the last year. I was also able to shift arguably the most important relationship in my life from one structure, a marriage structure, to another, which is a co-parenting structure. And of course, there has been challenge in that. And yet, now that I'm on the other side, it feels completely liberating because it is a structure that really feels aligned with me. And so that's a third way that I've had a really massive shift. And then all of these have opened into other big movements and allowed me, by understanding and seeing and working with the patriarchy and creating safety for myself and working through the somatic expressions of that held little t trauma, as you say, for all these years, then it has given me the freedom to evaluate so many other shoulds in my life. And which is not to say that I reject every conventional structure, but the ability to evaluate it and then affirmatively say yes or no is really empowering. I've done that with education with my children, and have now been able to tailor an education that is really appropriate for them as individuals. And that feels liberating. So again, this theme of, you and Jeffrey have really stewarded me to return to myself, right? It's not that you have installed any new information that wasn't already there, but you have lighted the path for me to return to what was already there. And maybe I had sort of silenced or buried deep away long ago, as most everyone I know has done, especially most women I know, right? And so,
Yes.
yeah, there's probably more. Feel free to prompt me, but those are the ones that are coming to mind right now. I mean, nothing short of a complete transformation, and yet it's still me. It's just that I've peeled back so many of these other layers that I was wearing for reasons that weren't really related to me.
Yeah. And would it resonate for you to say it's even more you than before. That's been my experience. So
Yeah.
you and also our thrivers and me just doing this work. It's like there is more me in me.
Yeah. I mean, I just connect, there's so many analogies, but I just feel so much lighter. I
Mhm.
had no idea how much I was carrying every single day. And no wonder things felt so much harder, even though I was doing all of the quote right things. I'm a much better parent now. I have so much more spaciousness to be present for my kids rather than following, checking off boxes in a parenting book. I'm actually parenting according to what feels good. I'm enjoying being in the moment. I'm not just spending time because I know I should spend time. I'm loving it. And there's so many examples like that, just really living in pleasure, which feels really dangerous for a lot of us, right? I mean, we feel like there's so much virtue in suffering and life being hard and grinding it out. And it's been such a revelation to realize it doesn't have to be that way. That's not an essential part of the process. Like you can enjoy your life every day and still do things that you feel are, really optimizing on the essential parts of you as well.
About that, Erin, that grinding it out and suffering are actually not essential to living a full life at all, and an amazing life. And I remember all you have been engaging so deeply with each of these patriarchal knots, each
Mm,
of the binds. You would go there and you would just like untangling yourself out of it, liberating yourself from it. You've really um you've really engaged so deeply in this work, and you've made it your own. You've made this liberation journey truly your own. And I just some of the highlights of these knots that you've untied. I remember our conversations about patriarchy induced mom guilt, and
mm,
and then how we show up in relationships and what we tolerate in relationships, right? And our relationship with ourself, with our body, with our
mm,
genius. Can you speak to any of these areas and what shifted for you?
mm. Yeah, I mean, well, just to start with, it's really interesting to notice that, you have some key lines that you use, and by virtue of repetition, those lines have become my own, and now they're becoming my kids' lines
Mm,
use them when communicating with them. So, for example, how good can it get? And that's such a foreign concept. Before we're like, no, you should be happy with what you have. Like you're lucky to have this. And it's true. In many ways we are. And yet why should we create a false ceiling when there needn't be one? And so that I apply everywhere in my life. Like how good can it get? There's no limit to how fun my life can be, how much pleasure there can be, how much all of these traits that whether I subconsciously or consciously thought were off limits, I just didn't really focus on, so much about getting through. And, in addition, if not this, then something better. I mean, that is such an empowering thing that allows us to let go of things that maybe are 95% there, but aren't 100%. It has encouraged me to say, no, I think it's reasonable for me to find something that 100% resonates. So in terms of what you're asking specifically, I mean, I don't know. Can you give me an example to start with, and then I'll run from there?
yeah, absolutely. I think mom guilt is
Mm.
such a gripping, toxic area of imprisonment for
Oh,
probably, well, most moms, if not every mom under patriarchy. It just shows up
yeah.
in different ways, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's been such a big one for me. I completely had adopted this selfless mother idea that the patriarchy puts forth to us. We are supposed to be completely fit and gorgeous and sexy and beautiful. And we are supposed to now in this era, supposed to have amazing careers. And we are also supposed to be selfless mothers, right? Which means there's no end to what we will give. In fact, what is the best compliment for a mother under the patriarchy is you're self-sacrificing. We are celebrating the complete loss of ourselves for the sake of our children and arguably for our partners in certain relationships and potentially for our workplace, which is often, again, structured based on the patriarchy. And it certainly was in my case, even though I worked for a very progressive law firm, the inherent structure of private practice of law is patriarchal and assumes that you have someone at home who's taking care of the kids, making sure their schoolwork's getting done, making sure all those things are in place so you can work long hours and entertain clients. But that aside, I was completely, I was pretty much consumed with this idea of the selfless mother. And I had the capacity to do that. And yet it was killing me, actually killing me. I have had massive thyroid issues, sleep issues, all sorts of hormonal issues. And I have seen all number of different healthcare practitioners. And it sort of all comes back to this chronic stress that so many of us feel because we are trying to be the selfless mother and all of these things. And yet our bodies are telling us no. And so I tried to sort of prop up this system of the perfect selfless mother. Well, for at that point, it had been a decade, for 10 years. And physiologically, signs were showing up that my body was saying it's too much. And yet I couldn't psychologically let go of it because that is what I had been told it meant to be a good mother. And the shift has been so interesting by allowing, which is one of the big words in this transformation that I've gone to is the word allow, to allow. And that's so much a part of what you and Jeffrey have taught, but to allow all of the feelings, right? We don't, pejoratively name any of them. We give space to all of them because they really come from real places. And so in doing this, I have allowed myself to devote more time to me. And I have been much more flexible as a mother, and it hasn't been without some growing pains. And the interesting part is that, for example, when I was being the perfect selfless mother, I found myself needing breaks really often, of feeling like I was at capacity, and I just asking, or not even asking, I would often not ask, but think in my head, oh my gosh, I could really use a break. And yet what's interesting is that this whole unfolding happened over the course of COVID, when we as parents and particularly mothers have had a new level of devotion and physical presence with our kids, an unprecedented level. And yet the more that time passes and the longer it's been that I've been with my kids in this capacity, I strangely don't feel the need for breaks. There's more fluidity. And I think that's because I have just allowed myself to show up as I am. And this adage, that this sort of modern adage that we hear a lot now is like, take care of you first and then take care of your kids, put on your mask on the airplane before you put on your kids. I heard it before, but I didn't really feel it. And it's true. Now that I have made space for myself, it's actually so much easier for me to show up for my kids. And am I selfless? Am I perfect? I don't know. But really, isn't it that I feel great being with them and I don't feel stressed all the time? I think, and so that feels really, really freeing, is to have sort of unshackled myself from this heavy, heavy weight of mom guilt that almost all of us bear. It's really suffocating, and it's powerful. It's a really powerful message that we all receive. And, especially in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which, whether or not that's our own tradition, that's omnipresent in Western civilization.
And what a gift it is to the kids to unshackle ourselves. So we actually can show up in the real way, and that gives them permission to show up in real ways. And I've been just feeling so much more joy and expansiveness from you as you talk about your adventures with your kids and what you're doing, how you're designing their education. Like you have really been designing it from the place of pleasure, from the place of what feels aligned. and that they are in it with you. They are doing these
Yeah.
things too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because again, so many ripples that I did not expect from, this work that I've been doing. And one is that the more that I have allowed myself to be myself, as a consequence, the less that need I feel to sort of control my kids and have them fit in a certain box. And so the converse of that is the more that I've allowed them to be them. And again, we all feel these subtle energies. And so for them, not feeling that need to conform is also super liberating. But that's something I never intended to happen from this work. And yet it has, right? I mean,
Yeah.
by allowing
Yeah.
myself to be me, I have inadvertently allowed them to be themselves. And I think that's a real gift that a lot of us wish that we would have had when we were growing up.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, how my life would have been different if my mom and my dad too would have allowed themselves, right, to be who they are. What a different world we would live in, where everybody has that gift intergenerationally. And that's how
Yeah.
we're changing the world. And I just love your multi-dimensional story of transformation. I remember you also talking about the transformation of your relationship with your body, and
Yeah.
your romantic relationship, like how it is and how it's dramatically different.
Yeah. I mean, again, like just these two tenets of well, maybe three. Allowing is the first. The second is leading with pleasure. And the third, this idea of how good can it get? I mean, how many of us settle for settling, meaning at some point in our lives, we're like, it's just, you know what, this idea, it was a very youthful idea, but in reality, it's not possible. And so we settle for this idea of settling, like, that's fine. It's fine. It's good enough. And in fact, there's a notion that that to get over perfectionism, you should just settle with good enough. And there's some wisdom in that. And yet that is denying women this entire world of pleasure, right? And that has been, we're not to say that I'm a victim, but the denial of pleasure for women has been used for millennia, right?
Yeah.
To help us get in line and to fuel another system that is profitable for other people and not often profitable for us. And so, yes, like in the context of romantic relationships and with my body, it's like, is there a limit to how much pleasure I can experience here? I mean, no, even in a basic idea of eating food, I remember reading your book and you talked about this time when you went to a restaurant and you were really just soaking up all of the pleasurable aspects, the setting, the food, the small touches. And it really made me realize how little I do that. Even though food, as an example, has been very important to me, I realized that I was using food more as a way to control the really high baseline level of anxiety that I had in living a particular kind of life, a high performing life. It was just even wellness was stressful and a weight, like this very thing, self-care. Oh my God, I haven't done enough self-care this week. That's supposed to be freeing us. And yet it was another weight. And so giving myself permission to just enjoy food, like food as pleasure, not food as fuel, not food as deprivation, not, food as a way to look a certain way because other people like it when I look that way, right? It's like food is because I love the way this tastes. And yes, please, I'll have another because I'm enjoying it that much, right? Or personal sexual pleasure, or sexual pleasure, all of these things that everyone is, how many people are listening to this right now and getting a little tense because that's dangerous, right? A sexually embodied woman is a dangerous thing.
Mhm.
And so in so many fronts, like, how good can it get?
How good can it get, Erin? I get chills just, and you and I chatted about this before clicking record, is really, if so much has shifted, right, in a year, like how good can it get in all these, and subsequent unfoldings of your deeper desires.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear from you. What would you ask to yourself? Oh, what would you tell yourself circa about a year ago, right? Or when you started this journey with us? Because you were in a very different place, and there were a lot of
Mm,
doubts and hesitations and
yeah.
fears, and so much was just completely unknown, right? What message do you
Mm.
have
I mean,
for her?
I'm getting chills with you just asking this question. And I think that kind of says it all. But what would I say? I would say listen to your intuition. I would say step into the fires of transformation. And so the journey is not easy, but that's where the beauty is. And that's where the transformation is. Something that I heard recently that really resonated with me is that the chrysalis is the caterpillar's tomb and it's the butterfly's womb. You know, two words with very different meanings separated by a single character. And so, yes, there is work in it. But if you were a caterpillar, you would have no idea that a butterfly could be on the other side. And that's how it feels for me. It was this knowing that I have to do this, even though I couldn't visualize what was on the other side. You don't need to know. All you need to know is that is if you have the tiniest little inkling in you, the tiniest little voice saying yes, then just follow it. And that's what I did. And it's amazing. One of the really unexpected benefits, I mean, benefits doesn't even do it justice, of the work that we've done together is the collective aspect of healing with other women, of connecting in a very profound level with other women. And one of them in this course told me, well, if you walk into the fires of transformation, you can't get burned if you are fire, right? Like fire can't get burned with fire. And, that really stuck with me, right? We all have that in us. We all are, completely engulfed in these flames of passion and pleasure and a female force that we are really, really lucky to have. And so, if there's a part of you that says, I have that, and you do have that, but if there's a part of you that wants to uncover that, step into this work. It has without any doubt been absolutely life-changing for me in so many ways, and has catalyzed massive change in the most positive, liberating of ways. I have the rest of my life ahead of me having done this, and it's just incredibly empowering, which is a word that gets overused, but literally with power. That's how I feel starting the next decades of my life. So it's really, it's important. I say go for it.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing your inspiration and what you've experienced on this journey, Erin. It is such a pleasure witnessing, supporting your
Likewise.
transformation. Thank you. And changing the world with you.
Yes, absolutely. Month by month.
And there we go.